So we had a horrible scare. We were trying to figure out what Stacie wanted to talk about, and then we briefly thought Stacie couldn't make it. So I'm incredibly excited that you could be here, because on the call, I sort of sent a mail to Andy straight afterwards and going, oh my God, Stacie is a rock star. That's going to be an amazing session.
Thank you.
So thank you. We're super pleased you're here. So very, very quickly, just to get the ball rolling, tell us what you do at Nielsen.
Okay, so really quickly at Nielsen, I sit in the DE&I team, but I don't do the traditional DE&I. So when you think of DE&I, surely you're thinking of corporate culture and development and talent acquisition and perhaps things around the company makeup that are more aligned with inclusion. That is a really important function, and we have a lot of great folks that do that within Nielsen, but I work on the inclusive data, products, and capability side. So I take those same values, and I try to be sure that we're thinking about innovating with them so that we can serve advertisers and brands data that we can sort of operationalize all of these things that everyone talks about and say is important in planning and in buying and in evaluating content. I want to operationalize those within Nielsen.
Awesome. And this couldn't be more topical, given, I think, events of the last few days with a well-known Twitter business and what's going on. So let's just set some context. Why are brands and agencies thinking so much more carefully about where they place their ads? What kinds of considerations are you trying to help them think through?
Sure. Well, we all know that, post the summer of 2020, many of you, agencies and brands and others, made a loud and public commitments around investing in diverse-owned media, evaluating content with a finer lens, and really thinking about what audiences we are, reaching. And so as this unfolded, there became this need to really better understand how to do that beyond what we've been doing for the last 50, 70 years, which is looking at just demographics. And so, and the reason that brands did this, one, is because, of course, it was really important to them to be part of this movement. But also, it seemed to make sense as folks were thinking about investing with purpose in another way, how we could evaluate the environment of the content in which they're investing in as and having that stand for almost for their brand values, right? Like you want the ecosystem of content had a new really important meaning for brands to invest within as a proxy for your values and who you say you are and who you want to be for the audience.
So all of that sounds absolutely spot on.
Sounds great.
Sounds great. I guess the big question, and this is where we get into the meat of the session, I guess, is how do you measure that? So how do you determine suitability, relevance, appropriateness?
Well, a lot of that is subjective, right? And I think what we do at Nielsen is not that. What we're trying to do is operationalize data to give metrics around quality, right? We've all seen the reports that come out every year from a bunch of organizations around representation and content or quality or relevance, and a lot of that is based on, it's subjective. So how do we put an objective view on that is operationalized? There's a few ways that we're aiming to do that. One of the ways is through a new set of products around content, one specific one, which is inclusion analytics. But this one is really aimed at understanding representation within the cast, within content. And so, it's a very, it sounds sort of static, right? But we want to say, okay, of any given piece of content, of any given platform, genre, however we want to look at the data, what are the overall representation statistics, and then how do we drill down? We look at representation based on parity with population, right? So that's really static, and you're like, well, how am I going to just look at a piece of content or a platform and say, there is 10%, or there's an under-index of 50% for representation of women or LGBTQ plus people or Afro-Latinos or whatever. How am I going to take that and make that make sense for my brand? In a couple of really interesting ways. One is, obviously, it allows you to better place a product or invest in a piece of content based on the audience that you're trying to reach. But we can also look at attributes of content that are less static. So based on the metadata that lies between each piece, underneath each piece of content, we can extract sort of these higher themes around content and match those with the audience that is watching that particular piece of content and representation within that content. And when you can operationalize that and put it on the desks of planners and buyers, obviously you're able to, provide a better match for what you're investing in for your client. And also for media companies, it allows you to better think about the array of content that you're providing for investment.
So when I heard you describe this, and you've just done it again,
Did I do it again well? Okay, because I'm like, it's early.
The caffeine is still kicking in, but I still find myself thinking that's extraordinary because it's a whole level of additional nuance in relation to content placement is essentially what you're doing.
I agree, and I think what's interesting is when you and I talked, we talked about sort of the future of planning and buying, right? And we know that there's a lot of ways we're doing this now digitally. We have, we're using. It's not like no one's using metadata. People are, of course, but if you think about, I was thinking back to my early days. I think we talked about this as a media buyer at McCann Erickson. A little shout out to McCann getting me started, it was so simple the way we were evaluating investment. And obviously, a lot has happened since then. It's much more complex. But I think about the job of a planner or a buyer or someone who's strategically determining the distribution of dollars across media, and this being this new layer of not just evaluating audience. It's no more just about gross impressions and eyeballs, or at least it won't be in the next 3 to 5. It's really going to be about environments and matching of environments with investment.
So I guess the big question lots of people want to know, you mentioned the subjectivity, objectivity words. How objective is the measurement?
Well, what we're providing
today,
yes. I mean, inclusion analytics absolutely is that it's a very, it's just a metric you can look at a bunch of different ways and evaluate what inclusion is like in a piece of content. What it doesn't tell you is whether or not it is, a positive or negative. But then we have the attributes of content, which are also operationalized as well. So if you think about a content dashboard sitting alongside audience. So it's this intersection. I want to use my hands so much in this, but it's really this sweet spot between the intersection of metadata and around content, and then of course audience, right? So it's right in that center. And I think we've focused a lot of our investment in this space for the right reason for a very long time. But increasingly, as it's sort of coming together, this middle spot is going to, there's no doubt it's not going to grow, most specifically because I think, as we all have recognized, power is moving from providers to audience. And as that happens, audiences' demands around what type of content they consume and what they expect of content is changing. And so as audiences lean in harder on content that they feel is more, representative or more inclusive or, has storylines that are more meaningful, brands that are within that ends up giving you sort of a 1 + 1 = 3.
What does this mean for media owners? I had a very interesting conversation with Karen Nelson-Field, who I think lots of people know, who's going to be getting involved in SIM, which we're very excited about. And Karen was incredibly explicit, and obviously she's dealing with attention. But she will say, I am 100% on the buyer's side. I'm not on the seller's side. We work with brands and agencies and help them to figure out where to place their spend. Is that your take as well? Do media owners look at what you're doing and think, I'm not sure I like this very much?
Well, I think there's one of the questions we get, and especially when you kind of mix DE and I, is like, are we going to lose, or is there still going to be a place for the type of content that is, crime or, of course, there's always going to be a place for content that presents audiences or presents, identity groups in any specific light that maybe some can consider unfavorable. Of course, there's always going to be a spot for that. But I do think that media companies, giving them the opportunity to have this really unique view into their content and what they're offering so that they can round out some of that content and make sure that they're providing inclusive content as needed. And in my opinion, perhaps, be able to attract more investment.
I sort of wonder whether there's a kind of long-term unintended consequence that more challenging content goes behind paywalls and ad fund environments become this kind of vanilla environment.
I don't know. That's a good question, and I hope not, actually. I think there's always going to be a place for the type of content that some folks or advocacy groups or others feel is portrays audiences, or portrays identity groups in unfavorable light. I think there's always a place for that type of content. It's exciting. We love crime. We love drama. We love, murder mysteries. There's always a place for that. I hope that doesn't happen, but what I hope that happens is there's just sort of a broader distribution of types of content that improves not only investment opportunities for brands, but really ROI for advertisers.
So there is obviously a lot of work happening on the media owner side in the US, looking at trying to define objective metrics for quality, looking at emotional engagement and resonance for content. I think NBCU are doing some really interesting work in that space. Do you see this as a kind of buy-side equivalent, in a sense?
I think I do. And the reason I do is, look, we all know, it's interesting. I had this conversation, I think it was yesterday afternoon with another group of people. We were talking about using AI and ML to evaluate, like, you only need so much data, and you can really, what we said, in closed quarters, I said, well, you can machine learn the hell out of that. Like, you can just keep, and eventually to where you can actually get to understand attention through a set of actual survey data. And I think in combination, in the world moving forward, Nielsen data, the data I'm talking about today, along with subjective data, along with other attention research, this is all going to be really a new dashboard that's going to be used in investment.
And so one quick question, just a logistical question. Obviously, you can only determine the appropriateness of content after it's played out. So are you having to make future decisions based on past content?
And this is where I think the attributes of content metadata comes in handy. And again, you can machine learn the hell out of that. So where you can, if you have the right, there are so many tidbits and metadata pieces behind any specific piece of content that I think in combination with representation before it plays out, you have this data actually before it airs. This is all data that is behind the content. So how we bring that forward to the desks of planners and buyers moving forward is really interesting. We have a lot. We're working with some of your agencies now, some of the folks that are investing today, and I think this is definitely going to be on everyone's desktop moving forward.
Quick final question. Can you ever envisage, in the same way that we publish, overnights and ratings, can you envisage in the same way that we publish overnights and ratings, appropriateness scores? Which network was the most appropriate or have the most positive, representations of X, Y, Z in whatever year?
I don't know about appropriateness, again, because that's sort of subjective, but representation data, yes. And I think there's also, a lot of runway for working with partners in this space who are really validated among different identity groups. So think of sort of, an approval score by, GLAAD or Respectability or any of the partners that are sort of in the advocacy media space. So I think that that's definitely coming down.
Stacie, thank you so much for sharing some of those fascinating insights.
I appreciate your time.
I think it's great stuff.